The courtroom was full, heavy with anticipation. It was one of those days where anyone inside, including the lawyers and onlookers alike, had a feeling something monumental was going to change the course of events. Judge Thomas Caldwell, thin-lipped, gray-haired, known for his unbending expression and zero tolerance, entered the bench and impatiently tapped his pen. The case before him was routine A custody hearing for yet another dysfunctional family. Hundreds of these he had seen in his long career, and they rarely could faze him anymore. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Let's get started," he announced, his voice commanding as usual. The attorneys rose, and the young boy at the center of the case stood beside his social worker. He was a slender figure, barely 12, with big, solemn eyes that seemed to carry more wisdom than his age should have allowed. His name was Marcus, and all his life he had been shifted from one foster home to another, with less security than the one before. But today was different. Today, Marcus was determined to find that one person that he knew could change everything. Judge Caldwell adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers before him. "Marcus Miller, age 12, he read aloud. "Let's discuss the placement options." He glanced up. His gaze briefly met Marcus. There was something there, a flicker of recognition that hitched the judge's voice, but he quickly dismissed it. He had a job to do, after all. The social worker, a kind but clearly overworked woman named Mrs. Jenkins, began to speak, outlining Marcus' situation and the difficulties he had faced in the foster system. As she spoke, Marcus stood quietly, his eyes locked on Judge Caldwell. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the words he had rehearsed over and over again threatening to escape before the right moment. "Mrs. Jenkins concluded her statement, and the room descended into an uncomfortable silence. Caldwell nodded to continue, but Marcus stepped forward. He only slightly raised his hand, his voice calm yet firm. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Marcus' voice cut through the stillness of the courtroom, drawing everyone's attention. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the child interrupting him. The judge sighed, beckoning him to continue. "Go ahead, Marcus. But make it brief." Marcus took a deep breath. He didn't once take his gaze away from the judge. "Your Honor," he began, and even though his voice came out firm, it belied his jitters. "I know this may sound strange, but I'm your son." The words hung in the air, and the room just seemed to freeze. There was a collective gasp rumbling through the spectators, and even the bailiff, half asleep, suddenly woke up. Judge Caldwell's eyes batted as his face turned pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. He stared at Marcus, his expression cracking as confusion and disbelief clouded his face. "What? What did you say?" he stuttered, his voice quite uncharacteristically shaking. Marcus took another step closer, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I said I'm your son. My mom. She always told me about you. She said you were a good man, that you didn't know about me, but that you would do the right thing if you ever found out." Caldwell's eyes flickered down to the papers before him, his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through. He looked back at Marcus, his mind racing. The boy's eyes, those familiar eyes, stirred something deep inside of him, a memory he had so long buried. His jaw tightened while he forced himself to regain some composure. "This is highly irregular," Caldwell said, his voice threatening to crack. He cleared his throat and attempted to regain his authoritative tone. "We'll have to have a recess. Court is adjourned until further notice." He banged his gavel, his eyes refusing to meet Marcus as he quickly rose and left the bench. The tension was palpable out in the hall outside the courtroom. Already, reporters who had gotten wind of the unexpected revelation were gathering, cameras flashing as they tried to catch a glimpse of Marcus and the judge. Sitting on a bench, Mrs. Jenkins sat beside Marcus, her hand resting reassuringly on his shoulder. "You did well, Marcus," she said quietly, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and pride. "That took a lot of courage to say." Marcus nodded, his gaze distant. Had pictured this moment 1,000 times, how he would confront the man had dreamed of all these years, the man his mother had spoken about with so much warmth. But seeing Judge Caldwell's reaction had left him with more questions than answers. Would the judge welcome him? Be angry? Care at all? Meanwhile, Judge Caldwell retreated into his chambers in a whirlwind of his mind. He shut the door behind him, sank into his chair, and rubbed his temples, fingers trembling. The memories flowed, the relationship he had, the woman he had loved and parted ways with due to circumstances beyond their control. He had never known she was pregnant. He had never imagined that he might have a child out there, a son who needed him. He looked at a photo on his desk, a picture of himself from years ago, smiling with the woman he had loved. Her eyes were the same as Marcus, full of warmth and resilience. Caldwell swallowed hard, a tear escaping down his cheek. Had spent his life upholding the law, doing what he had thought was right. But now, staring reality in the face as his own flesh and blood stood before him, he felt lost. A knock at the door startled him, and he quickly wiped his face, asking who was there. It was his clerk, a young man with an ashen look of concern. "Judge, are you all right?" "The press is going crazy out there," the clerk said, his voice hesitation. Caldwell took a deep breath, nodded. "I will be all right. I need a minute." He stood, straightening his robe, his eyes steeling themselves with determination. "Have Mrs. Jenkins and the boy brought to my chambers. I need to speak to them." The clerk nodded and disappeared into the room. Caldwell breathed hard, attempting to steady himself. He knew this conversation was to be one of the most important of his life. He had always prided himself on his being unbiased, keeping emotion away from decisions. But now, in the face of truth for what he had missed, he knew impartiality was not an option anymore. A few minutes later, Mrs. Jenkins ushered Marcus into the judge's chamber. The expression on her face was guarded. Marcus lifted his gaze up to the judge, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. Caldwell gestured to them to sit down, his own heart racing in his chest. "Marcus," Caldwell began, his voice softer than it had ever been in the courtroom. "I need you to understand that. I didn't know about you. If I had, things might have been different." Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the judge's. "I know, Your Honor. My mom always said you were a good man. She said you'd do the right thing if you knew." A lump formed in Caldwell's throat, his voice searching for words. "I want to do right by you now, Marcus. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to be part of your life. If you'll let me." A tear escaped down Marcus' cheek, and he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." Mrs. Jenkins smiled, her own eyes misty. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something that both Marcus and Judge Caldwell had needed for a long time, an opportunity to heal, to cement a relationship that neither knew he had been missing. Judge Caldwell took the rest of the day off, a rarity that left the courthouse abuzz with speculation. He just couldn't bring himself to dwell on other cases, not with this revelation that had just unfolded. He went back home, his mind filled with thoughts of Marcus and the boy's mother, Caroline. He remembered their time together, the times they laughed together, the plans they made, the unexplainable growing distance between them with a bittersweet pang. He had never imagined that their story would have such a continuation. His apartment was silent. It was only the clock ticking in his living room. He sat on the couch, looking at the photo of Caroline he had taken from his office. She smiled back at him, her eyes vibrant as ever. How could he have failed to catch something so vital? He had given his life to the law, to the right thing, but along the way, he had lost sight of those around him that really mattered. The next morning, Judge Caldwell entered the courthouse with the surety to set things right. He had asked Mrs. Jenkins to bring Marcus to his chambers for all the understanding one would want, about Marcus' life, about Caroline, about all the years had missed. More than anything, he needed to understand the kind of life his son had led, and how he could be a part of that life now. When Mrs. Jenkins arrived with Marcus, the boy looked more nervous than he had the day before. Caldwell offered a small, reassuring smile, gesturing for them to sit down. He removed his robe, draping it over the back of his chair, trying to appear less intimidating. "Marcus," he began softly, "I know this has been a lot to take in. It has for me too. I want you to know that I'm here to listen." Whatever you want to tell me, I'm ready to hear it. Marcus hesitated for a moment, and looked at Mrs. Jenkins before turning to Caldwell. I want to know why you weren't there, Marcus said, his voice shaking. My mom always said you didn't know, but it was hard. It still is. Caldwell's heart ached at the boy's words. He leaned forward, his expression filled with regret. I didn't know, Marcus. If I had, I would have been there. Your mother and I, we loved each other, but circumstances pulled us apart. I never knew she was pregnant. If I had, I promise you, I would have been there for both of you. Marcus nodded, his eyes shining. She always said you were a good man? She never blamed you. She got sick, and after that, everything got tougher. Mrs. Jenkins laid a comforting hand on Marcus' shoulder. Marcus has been through a lot, Judge Caldwell. He's a tough kid, but he's had too much to deal with for any child. Caldwell swallowed, his eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. Marcus, I know I can't change the past, but I want to now be part of your life. I want to help make things better for you. I know it won't be easy, I know it will take time, but I'm here. If you'll have me. Marcus started fidgeting with his fingers, looking down at his hands. After a while, he looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. What would that even look like? You being in my life? Caldwell took a deep breath. It means that I will be there for you. Whatever you need, school, a place to stay, someone to talk to. I want to be your father, Marcus. I want to make up for lost time, as much as I can. Marcus' eyes welled up, and he nodded almost imperceptibly. I think I'd be like that, he said, his voice catching. Mrs. Jenkins smiled, her eyes misty as she watched the two of them. Caldwell stood, walked around his desk, and knelt before Marcus. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke softly. Well, take it one step at a time, all right? You don't have to decide everything today. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you. Marcus sniffled, a small smile tugging at his lips. Okay. One step at a time. Over the next several weeks, Caldwell fulfilled his promise. Better foster home placement, a temporary situation while they worked through the legalities of custody, frequent visits where he took Marcus out for meals, helped with homework, and simply spent time with him. Slowly, they began building that bond, drawing closer with every moment. One Saturday afternoon, Caldwell took Marcus to a local park. It was a bright, sunny day, the kind of day that seemed perfect for new beginnings. They sat on a bench and watched children playing on the swings and families having picnics. Caldwell looked over at Marcus, who was watching the other kids with a reflective look on his face. You know, I used to bring your mom to a park just like this, Caldwell said, his voice soft. She loved the swings. She used to say it made her feel free, like she could fly. Marcus looked up at him, his eyes wide. Really? Mom never told me that. She always talked about how you took her to fancy restaurants and bought her flowers. Caldwell chuckled, a hint of sadness in his smile. I did those things too. But it was the simple moments like this that meant the most to her. And to me. He paused, his gaze turning to the sky. I wish I could have been there for you, Marcus. I wish I could have seen you grow up. But I'm here now, and I want to make every moment count. Marcus was silent for a moment, then nodded. I think Mom would like that. She always wanted me to have a family. Caldwell felt his throat constrict, and reached over, ruffling Marcus' hair. You do have a family, Marcus. You have me. And I promise, I won't let you down. Marcus smiled, a real, genuine smile that made it to his eyes. I know, Dad, he said in a soft tone, the words slipping out without volition, as though it had been there all the time. The words swelled Caldwell's heart, and he blinked to hold off sudden tears. He had his whole life made decisions for others, delivered judgments affecting thousands of lives. But this being here for Marcus, being his father, was the most important decision he had ever made. While this development in the courtroom was yet to die down, the media continued to speculate, making Judge Caldwell's interference in Marcus' life a talking point. some questioned his motive, while others hailed him for standing up for him. Caldwell did everything possible to shut his ears to all that and concentrated on Marcus and their developing relationship. One afternoon, as Caldwell and Marcus were walking out of the courthouse after a meeting with Mrs. Jenkins, they were approached by a reporter. The man, clearly eager for a scoop, thrust a microphone in Caldwell's face. "Judge Caldwell, can you comment on your relationship with Marcus? How do you respond to those who say this is just a publicity stunt?" the reporter asked, his tone accusatory. Caldwell's frown deepened, and his arm reached out instinctively to block the camera from Marcus. But before he could speak, Marcus took a step forward. His voice was steady, though equally calm, diffident. "It isn't a stunt," Marcus said. "Judge Caldwell is my dad. He didn't know about me before, but he knows now. And he's here for me. That's all that matters." The reporter seemed taken aback, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for a response. Caldwell looked down at Marcus, pride shining in his eyes. He placed a hand on Marcus' shoulder, steering him away from the cameras. "Let's go, son," Caldwell said, his voice filled with warmth. As they walked away, he looked down at Marcus, his lips tugged up in a smile. "You handled that well. Better than I would have." Marcus grinned up at him. "Guess I learned from the best." Caldwell chuckled, shaking his head. "You're something else, kid." As the weeks turned into months, Judge Caldwell and Marcus found themselves settling into a rhythm, a new normal that neither had expected but both were determined to nurture. It was not without its challenges. The legal process to make things right between them was complicated, and Caldwell was always juggling his responsibilities in the courtroom with the commitment of being there for Marcus. But they took it one day at a time, just as they had promised each other. One day, Caldwell decided to take Marcus on a special outing. He knew Marcus loved history, something he had learned during their many conversations over dinner, and he wanted to share one of his favorite places, the city's historical museum. It was a place Caldwell had often visited as a young law student, fascinated by the stories of those who had come before, and he hoped Marcus would find it just as intriguing. They arrived at the museum on a sunny Saturday morning. The air was crisp, and Marcus seemed unusually quiet as they walked up the stone steps to the grand entrance. Caldwell glanced at him, noticing the pensive expression on his face. "You all right, kid?" Caldwell asked, nudging Marcus gently with his elbow. Marcus looked up, giving a small nod. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just thinking." Caldwell arched an eyebrow. "Thinking about what?" Marcus shrugged, his eyes downcast. "About how weird it is. I mean, a few months ago, I didn't even know you, and now we're here, like a real family. It's just a lot, you know?" Caldwell finally turned, facing Marcus, his body dropping to his haunches so they were on level ground. His eyes leveled with the boy's, steadfast, calm. "It is a lot," he acknowledged softly. "I know it hasn't been easy, and I know I have missed a lot of your life. But I am here now, and am not going anywhere. You and me, we are figuring this out together. And I'm proud of you, Marcus, every single day." Marcus looked up, his eyes misty. He blinked rapidly, trying to hide the tears, but Caldwell saw them and pulled the boy into a hug. Marcus stiffened for a moment before slowly relaxing, his arms wrapping around Caldwell. It was an awkward hug, but it was real, and it spoke of the trust that was growing between them. After a moment, they pulled away, both of them a little embarrassed but smiling. Caldwell cleared his throat, ruffling Marcus' hair. "Come on, let's go learn some history. I bet I can tell you things about this place that even the tour guides don't know." Marcus laughed, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Oh yeah? Prove it." It was a very successful museum visit. Caldwell had been right. He did know things the tour guides didn't, and Marcus listened with rapt attention as Caldwell recounted stories of historical figures who had shaped the city. They spent hours wandering through the exhibits, Caldwell pointing out artifacts and explaining their significance, while Marcus asked questions, his curiosity seemingly endless. They turned a corner and found themselves in front of an exhibit dealing with the civil rights movement. Marcus stopped in front of one display that showed pictures of protests and sit-ins. He stared at the photos for several minutes, his face contemplative. "Did you ever have to deal with stuff like this?" Marcus asked quietly, turning to Caldwell. Caldwell took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I did. Growing up, I witnessed many injustices. I was very fortunate because through it all, my parents taught me to do what was right, which wasn't always easy. People were judged by the color of their skin or their nationality. Some of that still occurs today. But we keep fighting, and we keep standing up for what's right." Marcus nodded, his eyes still on the photographs. "Mom always said it was important to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She used to take me to rallies sometimes, before she got sick." Caldwell felt a catch in his voice then, laying a hand on Marcus' shoulder. "Your mom was a good woman, Marcus. She believed in the right thing, and she taught you well. I'm glad you're my son." Marcus looked up at him, a small smile on his face. "Thanks, Dad. I'm glad you're my dad too." As they came out of the museum, he couldn't help but feel incredibly grateful about it all. The relationship he was building with Marcus was like nothing he had ever been through. It was challenging, yes, but most rewarding. It was the best thing he had ever done. He was learning just as much from Marcus as Marcus was learning from him, and for the first time in a long time, Caldwell felt like he was truly making a difference not just in the courtroom, but in someone's life. Meanwhile, back in the courthouse, all was not so tranquil. Caldwell's private life was still under speculation and scrutiny. One afternoon, as he was preparing to go to trial, his clerk entered his office looking concerned. "Judge Caldwell, you might want to take a look at this," said the clerk, handing him a newspaper. The headline read, "Judge Caldwell's Custody Case. Is it genuine or just for show?" Caldwell sighed, his jaw clenching as he read the article. It was filled with insinuations that his involvement in Marcus' life was a publicity stunt, that he was using the boy to boost his public image. Caldwell felt a surge of anger, his hands tightening around the paper. How could they question something so deeply personal, something so important? He breathed deeply, forcing calm onto himself. He knew this would get him nowhere, angry as he was. Instead, he concentrated on what was most important, Marcus. He had promised Marcus that he was there for him, and no media speculations would change that. He picked Marcus up from school late that afternoon. The boy climbed into the back seat, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and Caldwell could tell something was bothering him. He waited until they were on their way home before speaking. "What's on your mind, kid?" Caldwell asked, glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. Marcus had dithered, finally speaking in a low tone. "Some kids at school were talking about you. They said that you were only taking care of me because it made you look good. Is that true?" Caldwell's heart sank as he pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned in his seat facing Marcus. "No, Marcus, that is not true," he said firmly. "I'm not doing this for anyone but you. I care about you. I want to be in your life because you're my son, and I love you. Not because of what anybody else thinks." Marcus looked down, his fingers playing with the strap of his backpack. "But then why do they say it?" Caldwell let out a deep sigh. His face softened. "Sometimes, people say things they don't understand, especially when something is different from their expectations. But what does matter is what we know to be true. And the truth is, no one comes close to you in my book. No headline, no rumor, can ever change that." Marcus looked up, his eyes searching Caldwell's face. After a moment, he nodded, a small smile forming. "Okay. I believe you." Caldwell leaned over, ruffling Marcus' hair. "Good. Because that's the only thing that matters. Now, how about we get some ice cream before heading home?" Marcus' smile spread wide across his face as his eyes lit up. "Yeah. Can we get the kind with the chocolate chunks?" Caldwell laughed, nodding as he started the car again. "You got it, kid." Far from over were the challenges, but Caldwell knew they were much stronger together. With each passing day, the bond between them grew deeper, and with every challenge overcome, they became more of a family. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was all that mattered. The media frenzy did not appear to be abating, and Judge Caldwell knew he couldn't let it affect Marcus. He had worked hard at building trust with the boy and refused to let outsiders tear down what they had achieved. So, on one Friday evening, he made a decision he would talk directly to the people, clear the air. He called a journalist he could trust, one who, every time, had reported with integrity and agreed to a sit-down interview. It wasn't for his own sake, it was for Marcus. The interview was set for Sunday afternoon, in Caldwell's own home. He wanted Marcus to be comfortable, and speaking in their space where they were learning to be a family, he hoped it would be easier on them both. The morning of the interview, Caldwell sat down with Marcus at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in his hands. "Are you cool with this, Marcus?" Caldwell asked, studying Marcus' face. "I want to make sure you are comfortable. If you don't want to do it, we can cancel." Marcus looked up from his bowl of cereal, his brow furrowed in thought. After a moment, he nodded. "I think it's a good idea. I want people to know the truth. And I want them to stop saying you're doing this just for attention." Caldwell smiled, a surge of pride swelling in his chest. "All right then. We'll do this together." That afternoon, the journalist arrived with a woman camera crew. She was professional, respectful, and took the time to speak with Marcus before they began filming to make sure he was comfortable. They set up in the living room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. Angela started the interview by asking Caldwell questions about his career, how he came to care so much for the law, and what drove him to become a judge. Caldwell was candid with his response, discussing how he loved justice and did not want to see anyone victimized. Next, Angela brought the subject around to Marcus. "Judge Caldwell, can you tell us how you came to be involved in Marcus' life?" Angela asked softly. Caldwell looked over at Marcus, who nodded his head in a reassuring manner. Caldwell took a deep breath. "It was unexpected," he began. "I was presiding over a custody case, and Marcus was there. He stood up in the courtroom and told me something that changed my life. He told me that he was my son. I had no idea. His mother and I had parted ways years ago, and I never knew she was pregnant." Hearing Marcus say those words, it was like everything shifted. "I knew I couldn't just walk away." Angela turned to Marcus, her face soft. "Marcus, what made you decide to speak up that day?" Marcus hesitated, then spoke, his voice steady. "My mom always told me that my dad was a good man. She said he didn't know about me, but that if he did, he would want to be in my life. When I saw Judge Caldwell, I knew it was him. I had to take a chance. I wanted to know if what my mom said was true." Angela nodded, her eyes moist. "And now that you've had some time together, how has it been?" Marcus smiled, looking across at Caldwell. "It's been good. It's different, and it's not always easy, but it's real. He's been there for me. He helps me with my homework, he takes me to the park, and he listens. I know he's busy, but he always makes time for me." A lump formed in Caldwell's throat, and he reached over, placing a hand on Marcus' shoulder. "Marcus is my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I may have missed the first 12 years of his life, but I'm here now, and am not going anywhere. I want to be the father he deserves." Angela smiled, her eyes filling with warmth. "It really sounds like you've found something special in each other. What do you hope people will take away from your story?" He let out a deep breath, eyes steadily holding. "I hope people realize that sometimes family isn't about blood or about a great circle of time. It's about showing up, being there when it really counts. Marcus took a chance on me, and I won't let him down. I want people to understand that love and commitment make a family, not headlines and rumors." The interview aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming, people from all walks of life reaching out, sharing their own stories of surprise family connections and struggles they had faced. The negative headlines started to dissipate, and messages of hope and encouragement flowed in. Caldwell knew not everyone would understand, but for Marcus' sake, he was glad the truth was out there. A few days later, Caldwell received a letter in the mail. It was from Derek, the social worker who at first was skeptical of Caldwell's involvement in Marcus' life. The letter was handwritten, the words thoughtfully picked. Dear Judge Caldwell, I just wanted to reach out and apologize. When I first heard about your situation with Marcus, I doubted your intentions. I thought it was just another case of someone trying to make themselves look good. But after watching your interview, I see now that I was wrong. It's clear that you care deeply for Marcus, and that you're committed to being the father he needs. I hope you can forgive my initial skepticism. I wish you and Marcus all the best, and I hope that you continue to prove people like me wrong. Sincerely, Derek. Caldwell read the letter twice, his heart swelling with emotion. He showed it to Marcus, who grinned. See, Dad? People are starting to get it. Caldwell smiled, ruffling Marcus' hair. Yeah, kid. I guess they are. The months that followed were small victories and growth periods. Caldwell attended Marcus' school events, cheering him on at his first science fair. They spent weekends exploring the city, visiting parks, and even attending a rally for social justice, something that Marcus had asked to do, in honor of his mother. Caldwell was proud to stand by his son, holding his hand as they marched, knowing full well Caroline would have been proud too. The family of four sat on their couch one evening, staring into a movie, when Marcus reached to Caldwell and rather somberly, in a tone barely above a whisper, asked, "D'ya think Mom is pleased now?" Caldwell swallowed as his eyes misty. He nodded, his tone soft. "I think she'd be very happy, Marcus. She loved you more than anything, and she wanted you to have a family. I think she'd be proud of both of us, for finding each other, and for making this work." Marcus smiled, leaning into Caldwell's side. "I think so too. I miss her, but I'm glad I have you now." Caldwell wrapped an arm around Marcus, pulling him close. "I'm glad I have you too, kid. You've made my life better in ways I never imagined." They sat in comfortable silence, the glow of the television casting soft light across the room. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. And that was all that mattered.